I was still holding my purse when my son drove away. "Mom, just wait here. I'll be right back," Daniel had said, barely looking at me. That was an hour ago. The train station lights flickered above me, cold and indifferent. My phone showed no missed calls. His number went straight to voicemail. And somewhere between the first promise and the last echo of his car engine, I realized the truth. My own son hadn't forgotten me. He had abandoned me. That was when the conductor stopped walking and stared at me like he had just seen a ghost. If this moment already feels a little too real, stay with me. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been left behind by someone you trusted? And where are you watching from right now? I'm reading every story tonight. The last time I sat beside my son in his car, I remember thinking how quiet everything felt. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the kind that settles gently over two people who have nothing left to prove to each other. No, this was different. This was the kind of silence that presses against your chest, that makes you aware of every breath you take, every small movement you make, as if even existing might disturb something fragile. Daniel had both hands on the steering wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. "Are you comfortable, Mom?" he asked at one point, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. I turned to look at him. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said softly. "Where exactly are we going again?" "To the station," he replied quickly. "Just a short stop." "A short stop?" That was the phrase he used. I remember nodding, even though something inside me tightened. Daniel had always been a straightforward man, at least that's what I used to believe. When he was younger, he would tell me everything, even the things he shouldn't. He couldn't keep a secret to save his life. But somewhere along the years, that changed. And now, sitting beside him, I felt like I was riding with a stranger. The streetlights passed over his face in slow intervals, casting shadows that made him look older than his 45 years. There were lines around his mouth I didn't recognize. His jaw stayed clenched, like he was holding something back. "Daniel," I said gently, "is everything okay?" "Yeah," he answered too quickly. "Why wouldn't it be?" I hesitated. "You've just been quiet lately." He let out a small breath, almost like a sigh of annoyance. "I've just got a lot on my mind. Work bills, you know how it is." I did know, or at least I wanted to believe I did. "I understand," I said. "But you can talk to me." Another silence followed. Longer this time. Then he nodded once. "Yeah, I know." But he didn't say anything more. I looked down at my hands, folded neatly in my lap. They looked older than I remembered. The veins more visible, the skin thinner. These were the same hands that had once held him when he cried, that had packed his lunches, that had worked double shifts to keep a roof over our heads. Now they just rested there, unsure of where they belonged. As we drove, I noticed we weren't taking the usual roads. "Isn't this a bit out of the way?" I asked. "It's faster this time of day," Daniel replied without hesitation. I nodded again, though I wasn't entirely convinced. We passed a row of shops I didn't recognize, then a stretch of highway that felt unfamiliar. I watched the world blur past the window, trying to make sense of something I couldn't quite name. There had been signs. I could see that now. A few months ago, Daniel had started organizing things around the house. At first, I thought it was thoughtful. He said he wanted to make life easier for both of us. He went through old boxes, cleared out closets, even suggested selling some furniture we didn't need anymore. "You don't use this stuff, Mom," he had said with a shrug. "It's just taking up space." I didn't argue. I trusted him. Then came the paperwork. "Just routine stuff," he told me one afternoon, placing a stack of documents in front of me. "Bank updates, insurance, nothing complicated." I remember squinting at the pages, the fine print swimming in front of my eyes. Do I need to read all of this? I asked. He smiled a quick, reassuring smile. No, no. I've already looked it over. Just sign where I marked, and I did. Because he was my son. Because I believed that love meant trust. The car slowed as we approached the train station. It wasn't a large one, just a modest building with a few dim lights and a nearly empty parking lot, the kind of place people pass through without thinking twice. Daniel pulled into a spot near the entrance and turned off the engine. We're here, he said. I looked around. Why are we stopping here? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he unbuckled his seatbelt and reached for his phone. I just need to check something, he muttered. I watched him, a strange unease settling deeper into my chest. Daniel, I pressed. He turned to me, then finally meeting my eyes, and for a brief moment, something flickered there. Something I couldn't quite read. Guilt. Or maybe I imagined it. Mom, he said, his tone suddenly softer. Can you do me a favor? Of course, I replied without hesitation. Just go sit inside the station for a bit. I need to take care of something real quick. I'll be right back. There it was again. I'll be right back. I studied his face, searching for reassurance for the son I knew. But all I saw was distance. How long will you be? I asked. Not long, he said quickly. 15 minutes, maybe 20. I nodded slowly. All right, I said. I'll wait. He leaned over and gave me a brief hug. It felt different, loose, like he was already pulling away before it was over. Thank you, Mom, he said quietly. Then I opened the car door and stepped out into the cold night air. The chill hit me immediately, wrapping around my shoulders like an unwelcome reminder of where I was. I pulled my coat tighter as I watched Daniel drive off toward the far end of the parking lot. For a moment, I thought he was just going to park somewhere else, but then his car turned and kept going. I stood there frozen as the red glow of his taillights grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. He said he'd be back. He's just moving the car. He's coming back. I repeated those thoughts like a prayer as I walked into the station and found a seat near the entrance. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Each time the door opened, my heart lifted only to sink again when it wasn't him. I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. I tried again, the same result. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling slightly. Maybe his battery died, I whispered to myself. But deep down, something else was forming. A realization I didn't want to face. I looked around the station. A few scattered travelers, a tired-looking clerk behind the counter, the distant hum of a train somewhere far off. No one was looking at me. No one knew. No one cared. And that was when the truth finally settled in, heavy and undeniable. Daniel wasn't coming back. My son had left me here on purpose. A sharp ache spread through my chest, not just from the cold, but from something far deeper. I had given him everything, and somehow it still wasn't enough. I lowered my head, gripping my purse tightly, trying to hold myself together. That was when I felt it. A presence. Someone standing nearby. I slowly looked up. An older man in a conductor's uniform had stopped just a few feet away, staring at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. His eyes widened slightly, as if he was seeing something impossible, or someone he thought he'd never see again. "Excuse me," he said carefully, his voice almost trembling. Mom, are you Jerry Fleming? For a long time, I told myself that what happened at that train station had come out of nowhere, that it was sudden, unexpected, a cruel decision made in a moment of stress or confusion. But as I sat there staring at the conductor who somehow knew my name, something else began to settle inside me. A quieter truth. This hadn't started tonight. It had been building for months, maybe even years. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the strap of my purse as I looked away from the man in front of me for just a moment. My thoughts drifted backward, retracing steps I hadn't wanted to revisit. Because once you start connecting the pieces, you can't unsee the picture they form. Ma'am? The conductor said again, gently, as if afraid I might disappear if he spoke too loudly. Are you? Jerry Fleming. I forced a small smile, though it felt fragile on my lips. Yes, I said quietly. I am. He inhaled sharply, his expression shifting into something that looked like disbelief, mixed with recognition. But before he could say anything more, my mind pulled me away again, back into the past I had been avoiding, back to the signs I had ignored. It started with small things. Daniel had always been a practical man, organized, efficient. Even as a child, he liked things in order. So when he began going through the house a few months ago, I didn't question it. Just decluttering, Mom, he had said with a shrug, holding up an old photo frame. You don't need all this stuff anymore. I remember looking at that frame. It held a picture of him at 8 years old, standing proudly in front of a science fair project. His smile had been so wide back then, so full of light. Maybe we should keep that one, I suggested gently. He hesitated for half a second before setting it aside. Fine, but most of this stuff has to go. Most of this stuff. At the time, I told myself he was right. After all, I was getting older. Maybe I didn't need as much as I used to. Maybe simplifying things was just part of this stage of life. But then the changes became more personal. He started asking questions about my finances. Do you really need multiple accounts? He asked one afternoon, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. It's confusing. I can help you manage everything. I've been managing just fine, I replied with a small laugh. I know, he said quickly. But things are different now. It's better to keep everything in one place. Easier to track. He sounded so reasonable, so confident, and I trusted him. So I let him help. At first it was just reviewing statements, then it was setting up shared access in case of emergencies. Then it was suggesting we consolidate funds. Just in case something happens, he said. I need to be able to take care of things. I remember how comforting that sounded. I didn't want to think about a future where I might not be able to manage on my own. I didn't want to imagine becoming a burden. So I told myself I was being responsible. I was preparing. I was trusting my son. Then came the paperwork. That afternoon is still clear in my mind. Daniel walked into the living room with a folder in his hands, his expression calm but focused. I need your help with something, he said. Of course, I replied, setting aside the book I had been reading. He placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it, revealing several documents filled with dense legal language. What is all this? I asked, adjusting my glasses. Just some updates, he said smoothly. Bank authorizations, a few property-related things. It's all standard. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of the words, but they blurred together. You know I don't understand all this legal stuff, I said. That's okay, he reassured me. I already went through everything. It's just to make things easier down the line. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because something inside me whispered that I should at least try to understand. What exactly am I signing? I asked. He paused, just for a second. But it was enough. Mom, he said, gently, placing his hand over mine. "It's nothing you need to worry about. It just gives me permission to handle things if you can't. That's all, if you can't." The words lingered in the air. I looked at his hand on mine, at the familiarity of the gesture, the son I had raised, the boy who used to cling to me when he was afraid of thunderstorms. And I nodded. "All right," I said softly. He handed me a pen and pointed to the marked lines. "Just sign here and here." And I did, without reading every word, without asking more questions. Because I believed that love meant trust. Because I believed that a son would never use that trust against his mother. But sitting there now in that cold train station, I felt the weight of those signatures pressing down on me. Every page I hadn't read, every question I hadn't asked, every moment I chose comfort over clarity. They all led here, to this night, to this empty waiting. I blinked, pulling myself back to the present as the conductor shifted slightly in front of me. "You really are Jerry Fleming," he murmured, almost to himself. I studied his face more closely now. There was something familiar in his eyes, though I couldn't quite place it. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice unsteady. "Have we met before?" He let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. "You don't remember me." It wasn't a question. I shook my head slowly. "I'm afraid I don't." He nodded as if he had expected that answer. "That makes sense," he said. "It was a long time ago." There was a pause. A moment where the noise of the station seemed to fade into the background, leaving just the two of us standing there in a strange, suspended silence. Then he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "But I remember you," he said. "I never forgot." Something in his tone made my chest tighten. Not fear, not exactly, but something close to it. A sense that whatever he was about to say was going to change everything. Behind him, I could see a few people beginning to glance in our direction, curious about the quiet intensity of the moment. I swallowed, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. "Sir," I said carefully, "I'm not sure what you think you know, but I'm just—" "No," he interrupted gently. "You're not just anyone." His eyes held mine steady and certain. "You're the woman who saved that train." The words landed between us like a sudden crack of thunder. And for the first time that night, I felt the past begin to rise. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words echoed in my mind like something pulled from a dream I had tried very hard to forget. "You're the woman who saved that train." I shook my head instinctively. My first reaction, not pride, but resistance. "No," I said quickly, almost too quickly. "I think you must have me confused with someone else." The conductor, Thomas Y., would later learn, studied me carefully, as if measuring every line of my face against a memory he had carried for years. "I'm not mistaken," he said quietly. "I remember your face. Not perfectly, but enough. And your name, I never forgot your name." I looked away, my heart beating faster than it had all night. That name, that past. It wasn't something I spoke about. Not to strangers. Not even to my own son. Especially not to my own son. "You must be thinking of someone else," I repeated softer this time. But even as I said it, I could feel the truth rising inside me like something long buried that refused to stay hidden any longer. Thomas didn't argue. He didn't push. Instead, he took a step back, giving me space, but not letting go of the moment. Maybe, he said gently, or maybe you just don't want to remember. That hit harder than I expected. I lowered myself slowly onto the cold metal bench behind me, my legs suddenly unsteady. My purse slipped slightly from my shoulder and I caught it with trembling fingers. I remember everything, I said after a long pause. But that wasn't entirely true. I remembered what mattered. I remembered what hurt. And I remembered what I had chosen to leave behind. The station around us continued to move, people walking announcements, echoing faintly through the speakers, but it all felt distant, like it belonged to another world. Thomas stepped closer again, his voice quieter now. Do you remember the northbound line outside of Harrisburg? He asked. My chest tightened. I hadn't heard that name in years. Yes, I said slowly. I worked that route for a while. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. There was a night, he continued. Bad weather. Heavy rain. Something went wrong with the braking system on one of the trains. My fingers curled into my coat. I could see it now, not just hear it, feel it. The rain against the windows, the tension in the air, the sound of metal under stress. I remember, I whispered. And just like that, the memory broke through. I wasn't 72 years old anymore. I was back there, standing in the control room, soaked from running through the storm alarms, ringing voices shouting over each other. There's no time, someone had yelled. The train's not going to slow down. I had felt it in my bones, the kind of certainty that doesn't come from thinking, but from knowing. If nothing was done, that train would crash, and people would die. Thomas' voice pulled me back gently. You climbed up there, he said, his tone filled with quiet awe. Didn't you? I closed my eyes. Yes. The word came out barely above a breath. You bypassed the automatic system, he continued. Manually redirected the line. It wasn't that simple, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Because it hadn't been simple. It had been terrifying. The kind of fear that strips everything else away and leaves only instinct. I wasn't supposed to, I added. It was against protocol. But you did it anyway, Thomas said. I opened my eyes and looked at him. Yes, I said, because no one else could. Because there wasn't time to wait. Because sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. I remembered climbing the narrow metal ladder, my hands slipping from the rain, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out. I remembered the wind, the noise, the sheer force of the storm pressing against me. And I remembered the moment I pulled that lever. The moment everything changed. There were families on that train, Thomas said softly. Children. I nodded, my throat tightening. I know. I was one of them, he said. That stopped me. Completely. You? I stared at him, searching his face more carefully now. You were on that train. He nodded slowly. I was 35, he said, heading home after a long shift. I remember thinking I'd finally get a good night's sleep. A faint smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained serious. Then everything went wrong. The station seemed to fade even further around us as he spoke. I remember the panic, he continued. People yelling, someone crying. The train wasn't slowing down, and we all knew something was wrong. Then everything went wrong. The station seemed to fade even further around us as he spoke. I remember the panic, he continued. People yelling, someone crying. The train wasn't slowing down, and we all knew something was wrong. I swallowed hard. I remember thinking, this is it, he said. This is how it ends. His gaze locked onto mine, and then it didn't. Silence settled between us, heavy with everything that didn't need to be said. "You saved us," he said quietly. I shook my head again, though this time it wasn't denial. It was something else, something closer to pain. "I did my job," I said. "No," he replied firmly. "You did more than that." I looked down at my hands again. These same hands. Older now. Weaker. But once they had held a different kind of strength. "There were reports," Thomas continued. "They talked about what happened. But you disappeared after that." I let out a slow breath. "Yes," I said. I always wondered why I didn't answer right away. Because the answer wasn't simple. Because it wasn't something I had ever explained out loud. Not even to myself. "I had a son," I said, finally. Thomas didn't speak. He just listened. "Daniel was young," I continued. "His father had already passed. I was all he had." The memory of those days came rushing back, the exhaustion, the responsibility, the constant balancing act between survival and sacrifice. "There were opportunities after that night," I said. "Interviews, promotions, recognition." "And you turned them down," Thomas said. "Yes." Why, I looked up at him, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since we started talking. "Because I couldn't be both," I said simply. "I couldn't be everywhere at once. I couldn't chase that life and still be the mother he needed." I paused, my voice softening. So I chose him. The words hung in the air between us, heavy, final. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding, settling into his expression. "That's a kind of bravery people don't talk about enough," he said. I almost laughed at that. Bravery. It didn't feel like bravery now. It felt like something else, something far more complicated. "I thought it was the right choice," I said quietly. "And now?" he asked gently. I looked around the station, the cold benches, the strangers passing by the empty space where my son should have been, and for the first time, I let myself say it. I don't know. Because the boy I had chosen everything for had just left me behind. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The words hung between us. "You're the woman who saved that train as if they carried more weight than the cold air pressing through the station doors." I could feel people beginning to notice. A woman across the room glanced up from her phone. A man near the ticket counter slowed his steps. Even the clerk behind the glass window leaned slightly forward, curious. It wasn't loud. Nothing dramatic had happened, and yet something had shifted. I felt it in the way Thomas stood, straighter, in the way his voice carried quiet certainty, in the way the space around us seemed to tighten. "You remember now?" he said gently. It wasn't a question. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders sinking just a little. "Yes," I admitted. There was no point pretending anymore. The past had already stepped forward. Thomas nodded almost to himself as if confirming something he had believed for years. "I knew it," he said. "I told myself if I ever saw you again, I would recognize you, even if you tried to disappear." Disappear! That word struck deeper than I expected, because that was exactly what I had done. After that night, I had stepped away from everything that tied me to it. The interviews, the recognition, the endless questions. I had chosen silence. And over time, that silence had turned into invisibility, until even my own son looked at me and saw nothing special at all. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Thomas asked softly. I looked at him, then past him, letting my gaze drift across the station. People were still watching now, subtly, curiously. "I didn't think it mattered," I said. Thomas frowned slightly. It mattered to the people you saved. Maybe, I replied. But life doesn't stop after something like that. It keeps going. Bills, responsibilities, raising a child. I paused, my voice tightening just a little. Daniel needed me more than the world did. Thomas absorbed that quietly. I understand, he said. But that doesn't erase what you did. I gave a faint, tired smile. Apparently it does, I said. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned slightly and glanced toward the station office as if making a decision. Stay here, he said gently. Please. Before I could ask what he meant, he stepped away, walking with purpose toward a group of uniformed staff near the far end of the platform. I watched him go, confusion settling in again. For a moment, I considered leaving, slipping out quietly, finding somewhere else to sit, somewhere no one knew my name. Because this attention, it felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable. But I didn't move. I stayed where I was, my hands resting in my lap, my heart still beating faster than usual. Across the room, I could hear faint murmurs now. Did he say Jerry Fleming? No way. That story from years ago. I closed my eyes briefly. So it hadn't completely disappeared. Somewhere, somehow pieces of it had remained. I just hadn't been part of them. When I opened my eyes again, Thomas was walking back toward me this time, with two other employees. A younger man in his 30s and a middle-aged woman with a badge clipped to her coat. Ma'am, the woman said as they approached, her tone respectful but cautious. My name is Karen Mitchell. I'm the station supervisor. I nodded slightly. Nice to meet you. Thomas stepped forward. Karen, this is Jerry Fleming. Karen's eyes widened just a fraction. The Jerry Fleming? She asked. I felt a familiar discomfort rise in my chest. I don't think I'm that important, I said quickly. But Thomas shook his head. You are, he said firmly. Karen studied me for a moment longer. Then her expression softened. I've heard about what happened, she said. Not in detail, but enough to know it wasn't something ordinary. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Karen glanced briefly at Thomas, then back at me. Are you traveling tonight? She asked gently. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. I was supposed to be. With your son? She asked. The word hit like a quiet echo. Yes, I said. And I swallowed. He left, I said, simply swallowed. He left, I said, simply. Karen's expression changed immediately. Not shock, not disbelief, but something closer to understanding. I see, she said softly. Thomas' jaw tightened slightly beside her. He didn't just leave. He added, his voice carrying a hint of anger now. He abandoned her. The word felt heavier coming from someone else, more real, more final. Karen nodded slowly. Then we're not letting you sit here alone, she said. Before I could respond, she turned to the younger man. David, can you get a blanket and something warm to drink? Of course, he said quickly, already moving. I'm fine, I said instinctively. You don't have to. Yes, we do, Karen interrupted gently. Her tone wasn't forceful, but it was firm. The kind of firmness that comes from someone used to taking responsibility. This isn't just about tonight, she continued. It's about making sure you're okay. I felt something shift inside me then, a strange mixture of gratitude and sadness, because these were strangers, people who had no obligation to me, and yet they were showing me more care than my own son had just hours ago. I don't want to cause trouble, I said quietly. You're not, Karen replied. You're exactly where you need to be right now. Thomas nodded in agreement. You saved lives here once, he said. The least we can do is make sure you're not left out in the cold. His words settled deep, not as praise, but as something else. Recognition. Something I hadn't realized I had been missing. David returned a moment later with a thick station blanket and a steaming paper cup. Here you go, ma'am, he said, offering them to me with a kind smile. Thank you, I said, my voice softer than before. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, the warmth immediate and almost overwhelming. For a moment, I just sat there, holding the cup in my hands, letting the heat seep into my fingers. Karen crouched slightly to meet my eye level. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? She asked. The question lingered. Heavy, honest. I thought about my house, or what used to be my house. I thought about Daniel, about the unanswered calls, about the empty space where trust used to live. And for the first time, I said it out loud. No, I whispered. Karen nodded as if she had expected that answer. Then we'll figure something out, she said. You're not alone here. Not alone. The words felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. As I sat there, wrapped in a blanket given by strangers, surrounded by people who saw something in me I had long buried, I realized something else. This night wasn't just about being abandoned. It was about being seen. And somehow, that made it even harder to ignore the truth. Daniel hadn't just left me behind. He had walked away from everything I had ever been. For a long time, I believed that the past could stay buried if I simply refused to look at it. That if I didn't speak about it, didn't revisit, it didn't let it define me, it would slowly fade into something distant, something irrelevant. But sitting there, in that station wrapped in a borrowed blanket, surrounded by strangers who somehow knew more about me than my own son ever had, I realized something. The past doesn't disappear. It waits. And sometimes it returns when you need it most. Thomas pulled up a chair and sat across from me. His posture relaxed, but his eyes still filled with that quiet intensity. You don't talk about it much, do you? He asked. I shook my head. No. Why? I hesitated. Because the answer wasn't something I had ever put into words. Not clearly, not honestly. It felt like something that belonged to a different version of me. I said slowly, someone stronger, someone braver. Thomas gave a small, thoughtful nod. And you don't think you're still that person? I looked down at my hands again. They don't feel like her hands anymore, I admitted. He followed my gaze. They're the same hands that pulled that lever, he said gently. I didn't respond, because part of me wanted to believe him, and part of me didn't. Karen approached us again this time, holding a small clipboard. She crouched beside me, her voice calm and reassuring. Jerry, she said, I made a few calls. We can arrange a temporary place for you tonight if you'd like. Somewhere warm, safe. I looked up at her, surprised. You don't have to do that, I said instinctively. We do, she replied without hesitation. And we want to. I opened my mouth to protest again, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the realization that I truly had nowhere else to go. Or maybe it was the quiet kindness in her voice that made it impossible to refuse. Thank you, I said softly. She smiled. You're welcome. As she stood and stepped away to continue making arrangements, Thomas leaned back slightly in his chair. You know, he said there's something else I remember about that night. I looked at him. What? He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. After everything happened, after the train was stopped, and people realized they were safe, There was this moment. A moment I repeated. He nodded. Everyone was getting off the train. Some were crying, some were calling their families. It was chaos, but a good kind of chaos. I could picture it. The relief, the disbelief, the overwhelming surge of emotion that comes when something terrible doesn't happen. And then someone pointed at you, he continued. I frowned slightly. At me? Yes. You were standing off to the side, covered in rain, exhausted. I felt the memory flicker again. Distant. Blurred. I remember thinking Thomas said, his voice softening, that you looked like someone who didn't want to be noticed. That part, I remembered clearly. I didn't, I said. Why? I took a deep breath. Because the answer mattered. Because if people started seeing me that way, I wouldn't be able to go back to being just a mother, I said. Thomas frowned slightly. What's wrong with being both? I let out a quiet, almost bitter laugh. Nothing, I said, if the world allows it. He studied me carefully. And you don't think it would have? I shook my head. Not back then. Not in my life. I had one priority. Daniel. Yes. The name felt heavier now. Different. I thought if I focused on him completely, if I gave him everything, if I made sure he never felt the kind of loss I did when his father died, I trailed off. What? Thomas asked gently. I thought it would be enough, I said. Silence settled between us again. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. Because some truths don't need elaboration. They just exist. And now, he asked after a moment. I looked around the station again. At the people. At the quiet movement of life continuing. At the space beside me where Daniel should have been. I don't know what enough was supposed to look like, I said quietly. Thomas didn't respond. Because there wasn't a simple answer. A few minutes later, Karen returned, this time with a small folder in her hand. All right, she said, kneeling beside me again. We've got a room set up for you at a nearby hotel. It's nothing fancy, but it's safe and comfortable. I blinked, caught off guard by how quickly everything had been arranged. You did all that already? I asked. She smiled slightly. We take care of people here, she said. The words felt simple, but they carried weight, because tonight had already shown me what happens when people don't. I don't know how to thank you, I said. You don't have to, she replied. Just focus on getting some rest. Thomas stood up beside her. I'll walk you out, he said. I hesitated for just a second, then I nodded. Okay. As I stood, the blanket slipping slightly from my shoulders, Thomas reached out and adjusted it gently. Keep that, he said. It's yours now. I smiled faintly. Thank you. We began walking toward the exit together, Karen leading the way. As we moved through the station, I could feel the eyes of others on me. Not judgmental, not dismissive, but curious, respectful, and something else. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Recognition, not for who I had been to someone else, but for who I had been on my own. When we reached the doors, the cold air greeted us again, but this time it didn't feel quite as harsh. A car was waiting at the curb, engine running softly. That's your ride, Karen said. I nodded, then turned to Thomas. I never got the chance to say this before he said quietly. But thank you. I held his gaze. You already did, I replied. He shook his head slightly. Not like this. There was a sincerity in his voice that made my chest tighten. Back then, I didn't know your name. I didn't know your story. I just knew I was alive. He paused. And now, I know why. For a moment, I didn't trust myself to speak. So I simply nodded. Because sometimes words aren't enough. I turned toward the car, my steps slow but steady. As I reached the door, I stopped, just for a second, and I looked back. At the station, at Thomas, at the place where everything had changed. Not just tonight, but years ago. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. But as I sat down inside the car, closing the door behind me, another thought crept in. One that hadn't fully formed yet. If strangers could recognize my worth, then why couldn't my own son? And more importantly, what had he really done? While I was busy forgetting who I was, the hotel room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you, but forces you to hear every thought you've been trying to avoid. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in the station blanket, my purse resting beside me, like the only familiar thing left in a world that had shifted too quickly. The lamp cast a soft yellow glow across the room. Clean sheets, a small desk, a television I had no interest in turning on. Safe, warm. And yet I had never felt more displaced. For years, my life had been predictable, routine, controlled. Wake up, make coffee, sit by the window, wait for Daniel to come home or call. My world had grown smaller without me noticing. And now, in a single night, it had collapsed entirely. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Still no messages, no missed calls, no explanation. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for forgiveness because it doesn't intend to return. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting it down again. He's not coming back. The words formed in my mind with a clarity that felt almost cruel. Not tonight, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. I leaned back slowly against the headboard, closing my eyes. And that was when the second wave hit. Not the shock, not the confusion, but something deeper. Understanding. Because as much as I wanted to believe this had happened suddenly, I knew it hadn't. There had been signs, and I had ignored them. All of them. My gaze drifted across the room unfocused as memories began to rise again, this time sharper, more insistent. The paperwork, the accounts, the quiet way Daniel had started making decisions without me. And then something else. Something I hadn't fully allowed myself to think about before. The house. My stomach tightened. I sat up straighter, my breath catching slightly. The house had been quiet lately. Too quiet. Rooms felt emptier. Certain things had disappeared, small things at first. A lamp, a chair, then larger things. I sold a few items Daniel had said casually one afternoon. Just clearing space. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? It was his home too, or at least that's what I had told myself. But now I wasn't so sure. I grabbed my phone again, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened the banking app Daniel had insisted we use together. For a moment, it didn't load. Then it did. And what I saw made my chest tighten. The balance. It was wrong. Not just slightly off, nearly empty. I blinked thinking maybe I had opened the wrong account. But I hadn't. This was the account I had built over decades. Carefully, patiently. Every dollar saved. Every sacrifice made. And now, gone. No, I whispered. My fingers moved quickly, scrolling through the transaction history. Transfers. Large ones. Multiple withdrawals over the past few months. All authorized, all legal. Because I had signed those papers, because I had given him permission. A cold realization spread through me, slow and unstoppable. This wasn't abandonment. This was preparation. Daniel hadn't just left me at that station. He had been leaving me, piece by piece, for months. I lowered the phone slowly, my hands shaking. The room seemed smaller now, tighter, like the walls were closing in. I stood up abruptly, pacing once across the small space, then back again. No, there has to be some explanation, I muttered. But even as I said it, I knew. There wasn't, because the evidence was right there, clear, undeniable. And then the final thought came, the one I had been avoiding the most. The house. I turned back to the bed and grabbed my purse, pulling out the small folder where I kept copies of important documents. I flipped through them quickly, my heart pounding louder with each page. Mortgage statements, insurance papers, old bills, and then nothing. The deed. It wasn't there. I froze. I had always kept it in this folder. Always. I checked again, more frantically this time. Nothing. A sharp, hollow feeling opened in my chest. No. My voice sounded distant, even to me. I sank back onto the bed, the folder slipping from my hands onto the floor. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly. Because the truth was no longer forming. It was already there, complete. Daniel had taken control of my accounts. He had been selling my belongings, and now the house. If the deed was gone, if he had access to everything, then there was only one possibility left. He had taken that too. Everything, every memory, every piece of the life I had built. Gone, and I had handed it to him myself. Tears blurred my vision, but they didn't fall right away. Because the pain wasn't sharp. It wasn't loud. It was heavy. Like something settling deep inside me, pressing down slowly until there was no space left to deny it. I gave him everything, I whispered. The words felt fragile, broken. I gave him everything, and in return, he had erased me. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, letting the weight of it settle, until another thought pushed through. Unexpected, unwelcome, but impossible to ignore. If he had done all this, if he had planned it so carefully, then tonight at the station wasn't a mistake. It was the final step, the moment where he no longer needed to pretend, the moment where he could walk away completely without anything tying him back to me. A clean break. For him, a complete loss. For me, I wiped my eyes slowly, taking a deep, shaky breath. And for the first time since I realized what had happened, something else stirred inside me. Not just pain, not just grief, but something sharper, clearer. A question. Not why did he do this, but something else. What do I do now? Because for so long, my life had been built around him. Every decision, every sacrifice, every choice. All for Daniel. And now, there was no Daniel. There was just me, alone, in a quiet hotel room, with nothing left but the truth. I looked down at my hands again, the same hands Thomas had spoken about, The same hands that had once saved lives. The same hands that had signed everything away. And slowly, very slowly, I closed them into fists. Because something was changing. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. Deep inside. If my son had taken everything from me, then I had nothing left to protect. Nothing left to lose. And maybe that meant I finally had something else. The freedom to face the truth. And the strength to fight for what was still mine. Morning came too quickly. Or maybe I hadn't really slept at all. I opened my eyes slowly, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, the soft hum of the air conditioner reminding me that I wasn't home, that there was no home to return to anymore. For a few seconds, I let myself pretend I was still in my bedroom, that Daniel was in the kitchen making coffee, that everything was exactly the way it had been yesterday morning. But reality doesn't wait. It doesn't soften itself for you. It simply returns. And when it did, it hit me all over again. The station, the empty account, the missing deed, the truth. I sat up slowly, the blanket sliding off my shoulders, and pressed my hands against my face. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Jerry, think." For the first time since everything happened, I wasn't just reacting. I was trying to understand. Not emotionally, logically. Because if Daniel had done all of this, then there had to be a process, steps, documents, records. Nothing about what he did felt rushed. It felt deliberate, careful, planned, which meant there would be traces. And if there were traces, then maybe there was still something I could follow. I reached for my phone again, this time with a different intention, not to call him, not to wait, but to look deeper. I opened the transaction history again, this time more slowly, methodically, each transfer, each withdrawal, each date. I noticed something I hadn't fully processed the night before. The timeline. It wasn't random. The first large withdrawal had happened 3 months ago, right around the time Daniel had insisted on helping with my accounts. Then another. Then another. Each one spaced out just enough to avoid suspicion. And then larger amounts. Closer together. Faster. Like someone accelerating toward a finish line. My chest tightened. He knew exactly what he was doing. The thought didn't come with anger this time. It came with clarity. I scrolled further. There were transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Names I didn't know. But one detail stood out. A company name. Silverline Property Holdings. I frowned. That wasn't familiar. At all. I tapped on the transaction, reading the details more carefully. The amount was large. Very large. And the description, property transfer settlement. My breath caught. "No," I whispered. "That wasn't just money. That was the house. It had to be." I stared at the screen, my mind racing now. If the house had been sold, there had to be records. Legal records. Public records. Something I could verify. I didn't know much about how those systems worked, but I knew one thing. You can't just sell a house without leaving a trail. And if there was a trail, then maybe I wasn't as powerless as I felt. A knock on the door startled me. I froze for a second before standing up cautiously. "Who is it?" I called. "It's Karen." From the station came the familiar voice. Relief washed over me as I opened the door. Karen stood there, dressed neatly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said with a warm smile. "I do," I admitted, stepping aside to let her in. She walked in, placing 1 cup on the small desk and handing the other to me. "You look like you've been thinking," she said gently. I gave a small, tired laugh. That obvious? She nodded. What did you find? I hesitated for just a moment. Then I showed her. The transactions. The company name, the amounts. She studied the screen carefully, her expression growing more serious with each passing second. This, she said slowly, this isn't small, Jerry. I know. This looks like a full asset transfer, she continued. Not just personal spending. I think HIE sold the house, I said, quietly. Karen looked up at me. Did you sign anything related to property? I swallowed. Yes. When? A few months ago. I didn't read very thing. He said it was just updates sold the house, I said quietly. Karen looked up at me. Did you sign anything related to property? I swallowed. Yes. When? A few months ago. I didn't read everything. He said it was just updates. Karen exhaled slowly. That's how they do it, she said. Who? She met my eyes. People who plan this kind of things. The words settled heavily. Not just because of what they meant, but because of how calmly she said them. Like she had seen this before. You're not the first person this has happened to, she added gently. And unfortunately, you won't be the last. I looked down at the phone again. I trusted him, I said. I know, she replied. And now I don't even know what's legally mine anymore. Karen stepped closer, her voice steady. Then we find out. I blinked. You mean, we don't guess? She said. We don't assume. We get facts. There was a strength in her tone that I hadn't realized I needed. You said the transfer went through a company, she asked. Yes, Silverline Property Holdings. She nodded. Then that company exists. And if it exists, there are records. I felt something shift inside me again. Not fear, not grief, but something else. Direction. What do I do? I asked. Karen didn't hesitate. We start by getting you someone who understands this better than either of us, she said. A lawyer. The word felt intimidating, heavy. I don't even know if I can afford one, I admitted. She shook her head. Well, figure that out later. Right now, we focus on information. I took a slow breath. Okay. Karen gave me a reassuring smile. You're not alone in this, Jerry. The words meant more this time, because last night I had believed I had nothing left. But now, there was something. Not everything, not even close, but something. The truth. And maybe that was where I started. Karen glanced at the clock on the wall. I can make a few calls, she said. There's someone I know, an attorney, who's handled cases like this before. Cases like this? I repeated. She nodded. Yes, elder financial exploitation. The term felt clinical, almost detached, but it described exactly what had happened, and hearing it put into words made it real in a different way. Not just betrayal, not just pain, but something that could be named, something that could be fought. I straightened slightly, gripping the coffee cup a little tighter. All right, I said. Karen smiled again. That's the first step, as she reached for her phone, stepping toward the window to make the call. I sat back down on the edge of the bed. My mind was still heavy, my heart still aching. But beneath all of that, something steady was forming. For years, I had defined myself by what I gave, what I sacrificed, what I endured. But now, for the first time in a very long time, I was beginning to think about something else. What I deserved. And somewhere deep inside me, the woman who once climbed into a storm to stop a train was starting to wake up again. The lawyer's office was smaller than I expected. Not the grand, intimidating space I had imagined, but a quiet, modest room tucked above a row of shops on a busy street. There was a faint smell of coffee in the air, and the walls were lined with neatly organized files instead of heavy wooden shelves. It felt approachable, human, which was exactly what I needed. Karen sat beside me, her presence steady and reassuring as we waited. I hadn't realized how much I depended on that quiet strength until now. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. I nodded, though my hands were still clasped tightly together in my lap. "I just wish I had done it sooner," I admitted. She didn't argue, because we both knew sooner wouldn't have been possible. Not when I still believed in him. The door across the room opened, and a man stepped out, adjusting his glasses as he looked at us. "Ms. Fleming?" he asked. I stood slowly. "Yes." "I'm Robert Hayes," he said, offering a hand. "Please come in." His handshake was firm, but not overwhelming. The kind of handshake that said, "I'm here to help," not, "I'm here to judge." We followed him into his office, where he gestured for us to sit. "Karen gave me a brief overview," he said as he settled behind his desk. "But I'd like to hear everything from you directly." I took a breath, and then I began. I told him about Daniel, about the accounts, about the paperwork I had signed without fully understanding, about the transfers, and finally, about the house. Robert listened without interrupting, his expression calm, but focused, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, the room fell quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair. "All right," he said. "Let's go through this step by step." His tone wasn't rushed. It wasn't emotional, but it carried something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. First, he said the financial accounts. He tapped his pen lightly against the desk. "You said your son had authorized access." "Yes." "And you signed documents granting that access." "Yes." "Did you understand those documents at the time?" I hesitated. "No." "You said your son had authorized access." "Yes." "And you signed documents granting that access." "Yes." "Did you understand those access?" "Yes." "Did you understand those documents at the time?" I hesitated. "No," I admitted. "Not fully." He nodded slowly. "That matters," he said. I looked at him, a flicker of hope rising. "It does. Yes, documents at the time?" I hesitated. "No," I admitted. "Not fully." He nodded slowly. "That matters," he said. I looked at him, a flicker of hope rising. "It does?" "Yes," he said, "because consent without understanding can be challenged, especially if there's evidence of manipulation or undue influence." The words sounded complicated, legal, but I understood the meaning behind them. "I trusted him," I said. "And that trust may have been exploited," Robert replied. He leaned forward slightly. "Now the property." My chest tightened again. "That's what I'm most worried about," I said. He nodded. "You mentioned a company, Silverline Property Holdings." "Yes." He turned to his computer, typing quickly. "Let's see what we can find." The seconds stretched as he searched, the sound of keys clicking filling the room. Then he stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly at the screen. "Well," he said quietly, "that's interesting." My heart skipped. "What?" He turned the monitor slightly so I could see. A property record, an address, my address, and beneath it, a transaction, finalized 3 weeks ago, sold. The word hit like a physical blow. Even though I had already suspected it, seeing it confirmed made it real in a way nothing else could. My voice faltered. I didn't agree to that. Robert nodded. I believe you. But it says it's finalized, I whispered. Yes, he said, which means the paperwork was completed and accepted by the county. I felt the room tilt slightly. Then it's over, I asked. Not necessarily, he replied. I looked at him, searching his face for something, anything, that might give me a reason to keep going. What do you mean? He folded his hands on the desk. It means we need to look at how this sale was executed, he said. Who signed what, under what conditions, and whether proper legal standards were followed. I swallowed. And if they weren't, then we challenge it. It means we need to look at how this sale was executed, he said. Who signed what, under what conditions, and whether proper legal standards were followed. I swallowed. And if they weren't, then we challenge it. The words were simple, but they carried power. Real power. Karen shifted slightly beside me, her voice calm. You said you've handled cases like this before. Robert nodded. Yes, unfortunately, elder financial exploitation isn't uncommon. The term, again, hearing it in this setting made it feel even more concrete. Sometimes it involves strangers, he continued, but often it's family. I closed my eyes briefly. Family. The word felt hollow now. What do I need to do? I asked. Robert didn't hesitate. First, we gather evidence, he said. All financial records, all signed documents, any communication between you and your son. I nodded slowly. I can do that. Second, he continued, we file a formal inquiry into the property transaction. That will give us access to the full documentation used in the sale. And third, he met my eyes directly. We prepare for the possibility of legal action. The words hung in the air, heavy, serious, real. You mean going to court? I asked. Yes. I let out a slow breath. A part of me recoiled at the idea. Courtrooms, lawyers, conflict. That wasn't the life I had ever wanted. But another part of me, the part that had started to wake up, didn't step back. It leaned forward. If that's what it takes, I said quietly. Robert nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. Good, he said, because cases like this aren't easy. They require patience, evidence, and persistence. I straightened slightly in my chair. I understand. He studied me for a moment, then added something unexpected. May I ask you something, Miss Fleming? Of course. Why now? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? Why are you choosing to fight this? He clarified. After everything that's happened, some people would walk away. I thought about that, about the woman I had been just a few days ago. Quiet, accepting, willing to endure. And then I thought about the train, the storm, the moment I chose to act instead of stand still. I didn't fight before I said slowly, when I should have. Robert didn't interrupt, so I'm not going to make that mistake again. I finished. Silence settled over the room. Then he nodded. That's a good reason, he said. Karen placed a gentle hand on my arm, and for the first time since stepping into that office, I felt something steady beneath the fear. Not certainty, not victory, but something just as important. Resolve, because Daniel may have taken everything he could, but he hadn't taken this. My voice, my truth, and the strength to stand up one more time. I didn't expect the next blow to come so quickly. Robert had just finished outlining the legal steps when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then at me. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, standing and stepping slightly aside. Karen and I exchanged a quiet look. Neither of us spoke, because we both felt it. Something was about to change. Robert's voice was low as he spoke on the phone, but I could see it in his posture. The shift, the tension in his shoulders, the way his expression hardened just slightly. When he hung up, he didn't sit down right away. Instead, he turned to face me fully. "Ms. Fleming," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something very important." My stomach tightened. "Okay. Has your son contacted you at all since last night?" I shook my head. "No." He nodded slowly. "All right, that wasn't a good sign." I could feel it. "What is it?" I asked. Robert took a breath. "I just received confirmation from a colleague," he said. "The company that purchased your house Silverline Property Holdings I sent, just any company." I leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" "It's part of a larger network," he continued. "A group that specializes in acquiring properties under questionable circumstances." My chest tightened. "You mean like mine?" "Yes." The word landed heavily. "And your son Robert added appears to be connected to them." Everything inside me went still. Connected how Robert walked back to his desk and turned the monitor toward me again. This time, it wasn't just a property record. It was a business registry, a list of names. And there, near the bottom, Daniel Fleming. My son's name, printed clearly, undeniable. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "No," I whispered. Robert's voice remained calm but firm. "He's listed as an associate," he said. "Not the owner, but involved." "Involved in what?" I asked, though I already knew. "In facilitating transactions," he replied. "Helping identify properties and in some cases gaining access through personal relationships." The words hit harder than anything else had so far. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was intention. This was strategy. This was a plan. I shook my head slowly, my breath becoming uneven. "No, he wouldn't," I said, though the words felt weak even as I spoke them. Karen placed a steady hand on my arm. "Jerry," she said softly. But I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at anyone. Because everything I had believed about my son was collapsing piece by piece. "He took care of me," I said, almost pleading now. He helped with the house, with the accounts. He said he was protecting me." Robert didn't interrupt. "He said he was making things easier." I continued, my voice trembling. "He said I didn't have to worry anymore." Karen's grip tightened slightly, no T restraining, but grounding. "Sometimes he said he was making things easier." I continued, my voice trembling. "He said I didn't have to worry anymore." Karen's grip tightened slightly, not restraining, but grounding. "Sometimes," Robert said carefully, "people say what they need to say to gain trust." I closed my eyes. And suddenly, everything made sense. The timing, the paperwork, the gradual control. It wasn't kindness. It was preparation. I opened my eyes again, staring at the screen. At what point I began, my voice barely holding together, did he stop being my son and start being this? Robert didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that would make it easier. Karen spoke instead. "He didn't stop being your son," she said gently. "But he made choices, and those choices matter." I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said, "they do." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of everything I was trying to process. everything I was trying to accept. After a moment, Robert spoke again. "This changes things," he said. I looked up at him. "How?" "It strengthens your case," he explained, significantly. That surprised me. "It does." "Yes," he said, "because now we're not just looking at a private family matter. We're looking at potential fraud, organized exploitation." The words sounded distant, almost unreal. "My son is part of that?" I asked. Robert met my eyes. "There's enough evidence to suggest involvement," he said. Karen leaned forward slightly. "So what happens next?" Robert turned his attention back to her, then to me. "We move quickly," he said. "We file for an immediate injunction on the property transfer." "Injunction," I repeated. "It's a legal request to pause or reverse the transaction while the case is investigated," he explained. Hope flickered again. "Reverse it, it's possible," he said. "Not guaranteed, but possible." I took a slow breath. That was more than I had a few hours ago. More than nothing. "And Daniel?" I asked. Robert hesitated. "We don't contact him directly," he said. "Not yet. Why not?" "Because if he's involved in something larger," he explained, "we don't want to give him time to cover his tracks." The logic made sense. But emotionally, it felt different. Strange. Cold. "You're saying I shouldn't call my own son?" I asked. Robert's expression softened slightly. "I'm saying, right now he's not acting like your son." The truth in that statement was sharp, unforgiving, but undeniable. I looked down at my hands again. Those same hands, once strong enough to stop a train, now trembling. The truth in that statement was sharp, unforgiving, but undeniable. I looked down at my hands again. Those same hands, once strong enough to stop a train, now trembling because of someone I had raised. "You didn't do this," Karen said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. I shook my head. "I trusted him," I said. "Yes," she replied, "and that doesn't make you weak." Robert nodded in agreement. "It makes you human," he added. "I let that settle, because for a long time, I had confused trust with failure, but maybe they weren't the same." Robert closed the file in front of him and leaned forward. "Ms. Fleming," he said, his voice steady, "this is the point where you decide how far you're willing to go." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, "this process won't be easy. It will involve legal challenges, emotional strain, and possibly confronting your son in ways you never imagined." The words hung in the air, heavy, real. "And if I don't?" I asked. "Then you walk away," he said simply, "and he keeps everything." Silence. Long, unbroken. I thought about the house, the memories, the years, the sacrifices. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who endured, who gave, who stayed quiet. And then I thought about the woman who stood in a storm and refused to let disaster happen. The answer came quietly, but clearly. "I'm not walking away," I said. Robert nodded. "Then we moved forward." Karen squeezed my arm gently, and for the first time since seeing Daniel's name on that screen, I didn't feel like I was losing him. I felt like I was finally seeing him. And that was something I could face, because truth, no matter how painful, is always stronger than illusion. The first official document arrived 2 days later, and when it did, everything became real in a way that words alone never could. I was sitting in Robert's office again, Karen beside me, when his assistant stepped in and handed him a sealed envelope. Robert took it, glanced briefly at the sender, and then looked at me. "This is from the county clerk's office," he said. My chest tightened. "This is it, isn't it?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "This should contain the full transaction record for your property." For a moment, no one moved. The envelope sat there in his hands like something fragile and dangerous, because once it was opened, there would be no more guessing, only truth. "Go ahead," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded steadier, stronger. Robert carefully broke the seal and pulled out several pages, laying them neatly on the desk. He began scanning them, his eyes moving quickly but methodically. Karen leaned slightly closer, watching his expression. I didn't move. I couldn't, because I was afraid of what I would see in his face. At first there was nothing, just focus. Then something shifted, subtle but unmistakable. His jaw tightened slightly, and that was enough. "What is it?" I asked. Robert didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned one of the documents toward me. "Look at this," he said. I leaned forward, and there it was. My name, Jerry Fleming, printed clearly. Below it, a signature. My signature. But something was wrong. I stared at it, my heart beginning to race. "That's not right," I whispered. Karen leaned in closer. "What do you mean?" I pointed at the signature. "The way the F curves," I said. "I always loop it a certain way. This isn't how I sign." Robert nodded slowly. I noticed that too. My breath caught. "You think it's forged?" "I think it's possible," he said carefully. "But we'll need a handwriting expert to confirm." I looked down at the paper again, at the name that was supposed to represent me, at the mark that was supposed to be mine. And for the first time since all of this began, something sharp rose inside me. Not confusion, not grief, but anger, quiet, controlled, but undeniable. "He didn't just trick me," I said slowly. "He replaced me." Karen placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "Yes," she said softly. Robert flipped to the next page. "And there's more," he added. I looked up. "What else?" He tapped the document. "This transaction was executed under what's called a power of attorney." The term sounded familiar, uncomfortable. "I signed something like that," I said, when he asked. "A few months ago," I replied. "Daniel said it would help him manage things if I ever got sick or needed assistance." Robert nodded. "That's exactly what a power of attorney does," he said. "It gives someone legal authority to act on your behalf." I felt my stomach drop. "So he didn't need my signature?" I asked. "Not necessarily," Robert said. "If the power of attorney was valid and broad enough, he could authorize the sale himself." Karen frowned. "But that doesn't explain the signature," she said. "Exactly," Robert replied. "Which raises a serious question." I looked at him. "What question? Why forge a signature if he already had legal authority?" The room fell silent, because that question didn't have a simple answer. And whatever the answer was, it wasn't good. Robert leaned back slightly, thinking. "There are a few possibilities," he said slowly. "Like what I asked. Either the power of attorney had limitations, meaning he needed your direct approval for the sale." He paused. Or what?" I pressed. "Or the document itself, the power of attorney, may not be entirely legitimate." The words sent a chill through me. "You mean he could have forged that too?" "It's possible," Robert said. Karen shook her head slightly. This keeps getting worse. I didn't respond, because I was already thinking ahead. If the power of attorney was invalid, if the signature was forged, then the entire transaction could be reversed. I said quietly. Robert looked at me, a hint of approval in his eyes. Yes, he said, it could. Hope flared again. Stronger this time, not fragile, not uncertain, but grounded in something real. Evidence. But we need to prove it, he added. I understand, I said. He nodded. Well, bring in a forensic handwriting expert. We'll also request the original power of attorney document and verify its authenticity. Karen leaned forward, and Daniel Roberts' expression hardened slightly. At this point, we'll bring in a forensic handwriting expert. We'll also request the original power of attorney document and verify its authenticity. Karen leaned forward. And Daniel. Robert's expression hardened slightly. At this point, he said we're no longer just dealing with a civil matter. I felt my pulse quicken. What does that mean? It means he continued there's potential for criminal charges. The words hung in the air. Heavy, serious, final. I stared at him. Against my son, yes. The room felt smaller, tighter, because this was the line, the one I hadn't fully faced yet. Fighting for my home was one thing, but this was something else. Fraud, Robert said. Forgery, possibly elder exploitation under state law. Each word landed like a weight. I looked down at my hands again. Those same hands, the ones that had held Daniel when he was a baby, the ones that had taught him how to write his name. And now he had used that knowledge against me. Karen's voice broke the silence. Jerry, she said gently, you don't have to decide anything right now. But I knew that wasn't entirely true, because every step forward was a choice, and every choice had consequences. I closed my eyes briefly, and for a moment I let myself remember him. Not the man on that document, not the name in that company registry, but the boy. The little boy who used to hold my hand at train stations, who used to ask questions about everything, who used to look at me like I was the strongest person in the world. What happened to you? I whispered under my breath. But there was no answer. Only the present. Only the truth. I opened my eyes again. And when I did, something had changed. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. I want to move forward, I said. My voice was steady, clear, certain. Robert nodded. All right, he said. Karen squeezed my hand gently. You're doing the right thing. Maybe, maybe not. But it was the only thing I could do. Because this wasn't just about property anymore. It wasn't just about money. It was about identity, about truth, about the line between love. You're doing the right thing. Maybe, maybe not. But it was the only thing I could do. Because this wasn't just about property anymore. It wasn't just about money. It was about identity, about truth, about the line between love and betrayal. And if my son had crossed that line, then I wasn't going to pretend it didn't exist. Even if it meant facing him not as his mother, but as someone who finally refused to be erased. The courtroom felt colder than the train station, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. There was something about the space, its rigid order, its quiet authority that made every movement feel heavier, every breath more deliberate. I sat beside Robert at the long wooden table, my hands resting in front of me, fingers intertwined so tightly they had begun to ache. Karen sat just behind me. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough. Across the room, he was there. Daniel. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. Not because he had changed physically, but because something inside me had shifted so completely that the man sitting there no longer matched the son I remembered. He was dressed neatly, calm, composed, as if this were just another business meeting, not a courtroom, not a confrontation, not the place where everything he had done would finally be laid bare. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from something else. Grief. Because I wasn't just sitting across from an opponent. I was sitting across from what remained of my family. "Are you okay?" Robert murmured quietly beside me. I nodded. Yes, and for the first time. It wasn't a lie, because I wasn't okay in the way I used to define it. But I was steady, and that mattered more. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The room fell into a formal silence that seemed to press down on everything. "Be seated." We sat. The hearing began. Robert spoke first. Clear, measured, precise. He laid out the facts, the financial transfers, the property sale, the questionable documentation, the forged signature. Each point built on the last, forming something undeniable, something structured, something real. I listened, but part of me felt distant, like I was watching a story unfold, one I had lived but hadn't fully understood until now. Then it was their turn. Daniel's attorney stood confident and composed. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is being presented as exploitation. But what we have here is a series of legally authorized actions carried out under a valid power of attorney." The words were smooth, practiced, carefully chosen. The defendant, Daniel Fleming, acted in what he believed to be the best interest of his mother, managing her assets, consolidating her property, and ensuring financial stability. I felt something twist inside me. Best interest. The phrase echoed in my mind, like a distortion of something that once meant protection. He had full legal authority to do so, the attorney continued, and there is no conclusive evidence of coercion or fraud. Robert leaned slightly toward me. "This is expected," he whispered. I nodded, but my eyes never left Daniel. He wasn't looking at me, not once. He kept his gaze forward, his expression unreadable, as if I weren't even there, as if I had already been erased. The judge turned back to Robert. "Counsel, how do you respond?" Robert stood again, calm, unshaken. With respect. "Your Honor," he said, "legal authority does not grant immunity from accountability." He picked up a document. "The signature on the property transfer does not match Ms. Fleming's verified signature patterns." He held it up. "We have submitted preliminary analysis from a forensic handwriting expert indicating a high probability of forgery." A murmur moved through the room. Small, but noticeable. Daniel's attorney stiffened slightly. Robert continued. "Furthermore, we have reason to question the validity of the power of attorney itself." That got the judge's attention. On what grounds? Daniel's attorney stiffened slightly. Robert continued. "Furthermore, we have reason to question the validity of the power of attorney itself." That got the judge's attention. "On what grounds?" the judge asked. Robert didn't hesitate. Because the execution of that document occurred under circumstances that raise serious concerns about informed consent and undue influence. He paused. And because the individual who benefited from that authority is directly connected to an organization currently under investigation for fraudulent property acquisitions. The room shifted. This time, the murmur was louder, more intense. I felt my heartbeat quicken, because now everything was coming into the open. The judge's gaze turned toward Daniel. "Is that correct?" she asked. For the first time, Daniel moved. He shifted slightly in his seat, and then he looked at me, really looked at me. And for a split second, I saw something. Not guilt, not regret, but calculation. Cold, measured, gone just as quickly as it appeared. His attorney spoke before he could answer. "My client has had professional associations," she said, "but there is no evidence linking him to any illegal activity." Robert stepped forward again. Yet he said, the word hung there, sharp, unfinished, because this wasn't over, not even close. The judge nodded slowly. "I am granting a temporary injunction on the property," she said, "effective immediately." My breath caught. The ownership transfer is to be suspended pending further investigation. Relief surged through me, sudden, overwhelming, not victory, but something close, something real. Daniel's attorney immediately stood. "Your Honor." The judge raised a hand. "This is not a final ruling," she said firmly, "but there is sufficient cause to pause the transaction and examine the evidence more thoroughly." She turned her attention back to Robert. "I expect a full submission of documentation within the next 10 days. "Yes, Your Honor," Robert replied. The gavel struck, and just like that, the hearing was over. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, alive with everything that had just been said, and everything still waiting to be uncovered. People began to stand to move to gather their things. But I remained seated for a moment longer, because something inside me needed time to catch up. "We did it," Karen whispered behind me. I nodded slowly. "We started," I corrected. "Because that's what this was, a beginning, not an end." Robert placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "This was a strong first step," he said. I looked up at him. "Thank you." Then I stood, and as I did, I turned. Daniel was still there, just a few feet away now, close enough that I could see every detail of his face, the lines I didn't recognize, the distance in his eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped toward me. "Mom," he said quietly. The word hit differently now. Not comforting, not familiar, just a word. "You didn't have to do this," he continued. I held his gaze. "Yes," I said. "I did." His expression tightened slightly. "You don't understand how things work," he said. "I was trying to protect you." The same words, the same excuse. But now, they had no power. "I understand exactly how this works," I replied. He shook his head. "No, you don't. You took everything from me," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because the truth was already louder than anything else in that room, and you expected me to stay silent. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time, he didn't have an answer, and that told me everything I needed to know. I stepped past him, not angrily, not dramatically, just forward, because that's what this was now. Not about going back, not about fixing what had been broken, but about moving forward, with truth, with strength, with the part of me that had finally remembered who I was, The days after the hearing were the longest of my life. Not because nothing was happening, but because everything was, quietly. Behind doors I couldn't see. In documents I didn't fully understand. In conversations between people who spoke a language of law and strategy that still felt foreign to me. And yet, I was part of it now, whether I was ready or not. I sat at the small table in the temporary apartment Robert had helped arrange for me. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place above a grocery store. But it was mine. Not borrowed, not controlled, not signed away. Mine. That word carried more weight than I had ever realized. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I stood and opened it. Karen. She stepped inside with a familiar warmth, carrying a paper bag. "I brought lunch," she said. I smiled faintly. "You're becoming a habit. Good ones are worth keeping," she replied. We sat together, unpacking sandwiches and coffee, the simple act grounding me in a way nothing else could. For a moment, we ate in silence. Then she looked at me. "You seem different," she said. I paused. "Different how?" "Stronger," she said simply. I considered that. "I don't feel strong," I admitted. She smiled slightly. "That's usually when you are." I let out a quiet breath. "I feel awake," I said after a moment. "Like I've been walking through my life half asleep for years, and now everything is sharp again. Clear. Painfully clear." Karen nodded. "That makes sense." I looked down at my hands again. "I keep thinking about him," I said. "Daniel." "Yes." Karen didn't interrupt. "I keep trying to find the moment where this started." I continued. "The point where things changed. Where I could have done something different." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Jerry, you're looking for a way to make this your fault." I looked up at her. "Isn't it?" I asked. "I signed the papers. I trusted him. I let him take control." She shook her head. "No. You loved him." The simplicity of that answer caught me off guard. "And that's not a mistake," she added. I sat with that for a moment, because for so long I had equated trust with weakness. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe the weakness wasn't in trusting. Maybe it was in taking advantage of that trust. A second knock at the door interrupted us. This time, I knew who it would be. I opened it. Robert. He stepped inside, his expression focused, but not tense. "That's a good sign," I said. He smiled slightly. "Yes, it is." Karen stood. "What do you have?" Robert set a folder down on the table. "We've made progress," he said. I felt my heart begin to race again. "Tell me." He opened the folder, spreading out several documents. First, he said the handwriting analysis. He slid one page toward me. The expert confirmed it. "The signature on the property transfer is not yours." Relief surged through me. Strong, immediate. "So it was forged," I said. "Yes." I exhaled slowly. It means the transaction is legally vulnerable," Robert said. "Very vulnerable." Karen leaned closer, and the power of attorney Robert flipped to another document. "We obtained the original," he said. "And—" He looked at me directly. "It's invalid." The words hit like a shockwave. The document was never properly notarized," he explained, "and there are inconsistencies in the witness signatures." I stared at him. "So he never actually had legal authority?" "That's correct." For a moment, I couldn't speak, because everything, the accounts, the house, the decisions, had been built on something that wasn't even real. "He built all of this on a lie," I whispered. Robert nodded. "Yes." Karen let out a breath. "That's enough to tear everything down." Robert gave a small, measured nod. It's more than enough. I felt something shift inside me again. Not just hope this time. Something stronger. Certainty. And the company I asked. Robert's expression sharpened. We've uncovered additional evidence linking Silverline Property Holdings to multiple disputed transactions, he said. Several of them involve elderly individuals in similar situations. My stomach tightened. So I'm not the only one. No, he said. You're not. The realization was heavy, painful, but also clarifying, because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was something bigger. What happens now? I asked. Robert closed the folder slowly. Now we escalate. Karen crossed her arms. How? We file a motion to void the property sale entirely, he said, and we submit the evidence to the district attorney's office. My pulse quickened. That means, yes, Robert said. This becomes a criminal case. Silence filled the room. Because this was it, the line we had been moving toward, the point of no return. I looked down at the table, my thoughts racing. Criminal case, charges, court, consequences. For Daniel, my son. Karen's voice was soft. Jerry, you don't have to decide right this second, but I knew I did, because this wasn't just about legal strategy anymore. This was about truth, about accountability, about whether I was willing to see this through no matter where it led. I closed my eyes briefly, and once again I saw him. Not the man in the courtroom, not the name on the documents, but the boy. The one who used to run toward me, not away. The one who used to believe I could fix anything. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I didn't fail you, I whispered under my breath. And for the first time, I believed it, because whatever choices Daniel had made, they were his, not mine. I opened my eyes again, and when I did, the answer was already there. We move forward, I said. My voice didn't shake. Robert nodded. All right. Karen placed her hand over mine. I'm with you, she said. I squeezed her hand gently. I know. Robert gathered the documents. I'll begin the filings this afternoon, he said. Once the district attorney reviews the case, they may move quickly. I nodded. Thank you. He paused for a moment, then added something unexpected. You're doing more than just fighting for yourself, he said. You're helping expose something that's been hidden for too long. I hadn't thought about it that way, but now I could see it. This wasn't just about my house, my money, my life. It was about a pattern, a system. People who believed they could take without consequence. And maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. After Robert left, the room felt quieter, but not empty. Karen looked at me. How do you feel I thought about it? About everything that had happened. Everything that was still ahead. And then I answered honestly. I feel ready. Not fearless, not unhurt, but ready. Because the truth was no longer something I was chasing. It was something I held. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't standing alone in the storm. I was walking straight through it. The trial didn't begin with shouting. It began with silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise because everyone in the room knows what's at stake. I sat in the same courtroom as before, But this time, everything felt different. This wasn't a preliminary hearing. This was the moment where everything would be decided. Truth or denial, justice or loss. And somewhere in the middle of it all, my son. Daniel sat across from me again. But today, he looked different. Not physically, but there was a tension in him that hadn't been there before. His jaw was tighter, his posture more rigid, and for the first time, he didn't look completely in control. That mattered, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because it meant the truth was reaching him, whether he wanted it to or not. Robert leaned slightly toward me. "This is where everything comes together," he whispered. I nodded. "I'm ready." And I was. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had already faced the worst part. The realization, the betrayal. Everything after that was just truth catching up. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. And just like that, it began. Robert stood first. He didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. He simply laid everything out. The forged signature, the invalid power of attorney, the financial transfers, the connection to Silverline property holdings. Each piece of evidence placed carefully, deliberately, building something impossible to ignore. Then came the witnesses. The handwriting expert. Calm, precise. "This signature does not match the known samples of Ms. Fleming," she said. "There are structural inconsistencies that indicate it was produced by a different individual." The judge nodded. Daniel's attorney cross-examined her, trying to introduce doubt. But the expert didn't waver. Her answers remained steady. Certain. Then came the document specialist. "The power of attorney lacks proper notarization," he testified. "Additionally, the witness signatures do not align with the registered identities. More cracks, more fractures, more pieces of the truth falling into place." I watched Daniel. He still wasn't looking at me, but I could see it now. The tension, the pressure, the realization that this wasn't something he could talk his way out of. Then Robert did something I didn't expect. "Your Honor," he said, "we would like to call Ms. Jerry Fleming to the stand." My heart skipped. I had known this might happen, but knowing and living it were two different things. Karen squeezed my hand gently as I stood. "You've got this," she whispered. I walked to the stand slowly, each step deliberate, each breath measured. I took the oath, sat down, and faced the room. "Ms. Fleming," Robert began, his voice calm, "can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" I looked at Daniel. For the first time since this began, I didn't see a stranger. I saw both. The son I had raised and the man he had. The son I had raised and the man he had become. "He's my son," I said. My voice was steady, but inside, everything shifted. "Did you authorize him to sell your home?" Robert asked. "No. Did you knowingly sign any documents approving that sale become?" "He's my son," I said. My voice was steady, but inside, everything shifted. "Did you authorize him to sell your home?" Robert asked. "No. Did you knowingly sign any documents approving that sale? No. Did you understand the documents you signed granting him access to your accounts?" I paused, then answered honestly. "No," Robert nodded. "Why not?" "Because I trusted him," I said. The words echoed in the room. Simple, clear, powerful. Robert stepped back slightly. No further questions. Then it was their turn. Daniel's attorney approached. Her tone was polite, controlled, but there was something sharper beneath it. "Ms. Fleming," she began, "you trusted your son, correct?" "Yes." "And you gave him access to your financial accounts?" "Yes." "And you signed documents allowing him to manage your affairs?" "Yes." She nodded. "So it's possible," she continued, "that you misunderstood what you were signing, and you signed documents allowing him to manage your affairs?" "Yes." She nodded. "So it's possible," she continued, "that you simply misunderstood what you were signing." The implication hung in the air. That this was confusion, mistake, age. I met her gaze. "No," I said. "Why not?" she pressed. "Because misunderstanding doesn't change the truth," I replied. A slight shift in the room. Subtle, but real. She tried again. "Isn't it true that your son was trying to help you manage your assets?" "No." "And how can you be so certain?" I didn't hesitate. "Because help doesn't require lies." Silence, heavy, unavoidable. For the first time, her confidence wavered. She stepped back. No further questions. I stepped down from the stand. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel uncertain. I felt seen. Robert gave me a slight nod as I returned to my seat. Karen's eyes were shining. "You were incredible," she whispered. I shook my head slightly. I was honest. And maybe that was enough. The final arguments came. Daniel's attorney tried to hold on to the idea of authority, of misunderstanding, of intention. But the weight of the evidence was too much. Robert stood one last time. "This case is not about complexity," he said. "It's about clarity." He paused. "A woman trusted her son. That trust was exploited. Documents were falsified. Property was taken." He looked directly at the judge. "And the law exists to correct that." The courtroom fell silent again. And this time, it felt different. Not tense, not uncertain, but resolved. The judge leaned forward slightly. "I will review the evidence and issue a ruling shortly," she said. The gavel struck. And just like that, it was over. Not finished, but decided in everything but words. As people began to stand to move to leave, I stayed seated. Because there was one more thing I needed to do. I stood slowly and turned. Daniel was still there, watching me now, really watching. No distance, no avoidance, just presence. For a moment, we said nothing. Then he spoke. "Mom." I held up a hand. Not harsh, not angry, just final. "Don't," I said. He stopped. And in that moment, I saw it. Not the man who had taken everything, but the boy who had lost something far more important. Himself. "I hope one day you understand what you did," I said quietly. His expression shifted. Just slightly. And that was enough. Because understanding would be his burden now, not mine. I turned and walked away. Not broken, not defeated, but whole. In a way I hadn't been for a very long time. The ruling came 3 days later, and even though I had prepared myself for it, even though Robert had told me what to expect, nothing could truly prepare you for the moment your life is given back to you. I stood in the courtroom again, the same wooden benches, the same quiet air, but this time it felt different, lighter. Not because the past had disappeared, but because the truth had already done its work. The judge entered and we all stood, then sat, and just like before, everything became still. She adjusted the papers in front of her, her expression calm, composed, unreadable. But her voice carried finality. After reviewing the evidence presented, she began, "This court finds that the property transfer executed under the name of Miss Jerry Fleming was not conducted with valid legal authority." My breath caught. This court recognizes the documented forgery of signature, the invalid power of attorney, and the pattern of financial manipulation. Each word felt like something being restored. And therefore, rules that the sale of the property is hereby nullified. A sharp silence filled the room. Then relief. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep. So ordered, she concluded. The gavel struck, and just like that, it was over. But not in the way I had imagined. There was no celebration, no applause, just a quiet understanding that something important had been corrected. Robert leaned toward me. "It's yours again," he said softly. I nodded. I couldn't speak, because it wasn't just a house. It was everything it represented. My life, my history, my identity. Karen squeezed my hand gently from behind. "You did it," she whispered. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said quietly. I didn't lose, because that was the truth. This wasn't about winning. It was about not being erased. I stood slowly, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe, fully, deeply, without fear. Then I turned. Daniel was there, standing just a few feet away. But this time, he didn't look composed. He didn't look controlled. He looked small. Not physically, but in a way that had nothing to do with size. His shoulders were slightly slumped, his eyes uncertain, and for the first time, there was no defense left in him. No argument was no defense left in him. No argument, no explanation, just silence. We stood there facing each other. Not as mother and son, not as enemies, but as two people separated by something that could never be undone. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said quietly. His voice was different, less certain, less sure of itself. I held his gaze. "It already had," I replied. He looked down for a moment, then back at me. I was trying to build something, he said. Something bigger. Something that would cost you nothing, I interrupted gently. He flinched slightly, because he knew. He knew exactly what it had cost. I took a step closer. Not in anger, not in accusation, but in truth. "You didn't just take my house," I said. "You took my trust." The words landed harder than anything else I could have said. Because they were simple, and they were real. "I thought you'd understand," he said. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "Because I would never do that to you." Silence again, longer this time. He swallowed. "I didn't think you'd fight back," he admitted, and there it was. The final piece. The assumption that I would stay quiet, that I would accept it, that I would disappear. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the boy I had raised. I saw the choice he had made, and I accepted it. Not because I agreed with it, but because I could no longer carry it for him. "I'm not who you thought I was," I said. My voice was calm, steady, clear. He nodded slowly. "I know that now." I studied him for a moment longer. Then I said the only thing left to say. "I hope you find your way back to something better than this. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something honest, something real. I turned and walked away, not looking back, because some chapters don't need to be revisited. Outside, the air felt different, brighter, warmer. Or maybe it was just me. Karen and Robert walked beside me, their presence steady grounding. "What's next?" Karen asked. I paused. The question felt different now. Not heavy, not overwhelming, but open, full of possibility. I think I said slowly, "I go home." The word felt new, fresh. "Reclaimed." Robert smiled. That sounds like a good place to start. And it was, but it wasn't just about returning to a house. It was about returning to myself. The woman who had once stood in a storm and made a choice. The woman who had trusted and been hurt. The woman who had lost everything and still found a way to stand again. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure, but peace. Because the past hadn't been erased. It had been faced, and that made all the difference. After everything that happened, I spent a long time thinking about what it all meant. Not just the betrayal, not just the fight, but the lesson. Because there is always a lesson, even in the hardest moments, especially in the hardest moments. I learned that trust is not weakness, it is a gift. And like any gift, it can be misused. But that doesn't make it wrong. It just means we must learn where to place it. I learned that silence does not protect you. It only hides the truth until the truth becomes too big to ignore. And I learned that strength does not always look like action. Sometimes it looks like standing still and refusing to be moved. If you've ever been hurt by someone you trusted, if you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, if you've ever wondered whether it's too late to stand up for yourself, I want you to hear this. It's not. It never is. Your story is not over just because someone else tried to write the ending. You still have the pen, and you can still choose how it ends. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me, have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it felt impossible? Where are you watching from today, and if you believe in stories about truth, strength, and second chances? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the story that saves someone else starts with yours. Sometimes the hardest truths in life don't come from strangers. They come from the people we love the most. And when that happens, it can feel like everything you built, your trust, your memories, your identity has been taken from you in a single moment. But here is what this story reminds us, even when everything is stripped away. Your worth is not something anyone can take. Trust is not weakness. Loving deeply is not a mistake. What happened to you does not define who you are. It reveals who others chose to become. And that difference matters. Because while someone else may choose deception, you still have the power to choose truth. While someone else may walk away from integrity, you still have the strength to stand in it. There will be moments in life when you are tested in ways you never expected. Moments when silence feels easier than speaking up. When walking away feels safer than fighting back. But the truth is, your voice matters even when it shakes. Your story matters even when others try to rewrite it. And your strength often appears not when everything is easy, but when everything is falling apart. Healing does not always mean going back to what was. Sometimes it means standing firm in what is right, even when it hurts. Sometimes it means letting go of who someone used to be so you can finally protect who you are. If this story touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it felt impossible? What would you have done in this situation? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe in stories about strength, truth, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes the next story you hear might be the one that changes everything.